have gone for the head.
My first thought after the end credits began to roll on Avengers Infinity War was that the last 10 years were impossible. These 19 films, and especially the last one, couldn't have happened. They just shouldn't have. I mean, I remember spending summer nights dreaming about them and talking about them with my brother and friends, 20 years ago now. Longer than that. But those were just fantasies, and we knew even then that we would never get anything like Infinity War. We just knew it was impossible. I mean, we did get Roger Corman's Fantastic Four movie.
Genetically transformed, they become the most powerful superheroes of all time.
And that's all we felt we were ever going to deserve. But my second thought was that people were going to have a lot of criticisms of the ending. And if that's you, here's why you're wrong. As we get further away from the debut of the third Avengers, that prediction is proving spot on. Everyone agrees the deaths at the end of the movie don't matter. We know that Marvel is going to make additional Spider-Man and Black Panther movies because of money, so those characters, likely all of them, are going to return. A lot of people argue this renders death in the Marvel Cinematic Universe meaningless, and that's just where I disagree. Death is meaningless, but not because characters are going to get resurrected in the next film. So, looking at who is dead and who is alive, you could easily fix this meaningless death problem by swapping a few people out, right? Marvel has already announced a new Spider-Man movie, and Black Panther is a cultural phenomenon, so clearly we're going to get another one of those. At the same time, we know Robert Downey Jr.'s and Chris Evans' contracts are up, so why not just kill Tony and Steve instead of Peter and T'Challa? Because the ending isn't a problem. It's perfect. The deaths had way more meaning because of who died and who lived than if it was just a way to dispose of actors who need an exit ramp out of this universe. I'll explain that. Let's start with the death doesn't matter. Death doesn't matter, not just in this story. Death doesn't matter at all. In storytelling, at least. Everyone dies. Death isn't interesting in a vacuum. As an audience, we treat death as this holy act that has deep intrinsic meaning, but it only counts if the characters stay dead. But that's not how stories work, and characters don't need to stay dead for it to have meaning. Take something else that everyone does. Breathing. A character breathing doesn't mean anything, or at least it isn't interesting. It has no value to me as a viewer or a reader. What does have value, however, is understanding how a character breathing affects themselves and other people. Maybe the character is in a space capsule and it's running out of oxygen. Or maybe they just have bad breath and it is ruining their relationships. The point is that the act of breathing only becomes interesting when we put it into context of how it interacts with the people around the character. So I know, I hear you. What does this have to do with death? Well, like breathing, death is an inert story element. It is just a thing that happens. To give it energy, to give it meaning, you have to add the chemical reactions of other people. Jeff died, and he stayed dead. Or Jeff died, and he came back are equally meaningless anecdotes. Like my sex life, who cares? Like, you don't care. It doesn't mean anything. But Jeff died, and this changed his friends and family. Now, that's a story. We can tack on, and he came back, or and he stayed dead to the end of those, but that doesn't change the progression of the characters. The active ingredients here are the action and its effect. And we all have experience with this in fiction. We've all seen it before. That's right, I'm talking about Old Ben.
Hello there.
In Star Wars A New Hope, Luke Skywalker's mentor, Obi-Wan Kenobi, faces down his arch-nemesis Darth Vader. During their lightsaber fight, Vader vanquishes Obi-Wan, but guess what? That's right, that wily old Ben came back as a voice at the end of the movie, and as a ghostly apparition in Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. That's not dead. So did Obi-Wan's death not matter because he came back? Of course it mattered. Of course it did. Obi-Wan's death still mattered, though, because it changed Luke Skywalker. This is a classic hero's journey. Obi-Wan is a metaphor for death and how it affects people. When Obi-Wan says he will become more powerful than you could possibly imagine, he isn't talking about turning into a Force ghost. He's talking about how his death will serve as a catalyst on Luke's hero's journey. When the old wizard returns as a ghost, that is the metaphor coming to life to show how the death of the mentor has enabled Luke to grow and change. So death doesn't fucking matter. It is meaningless on its own. A character dies, they come back, they turn into a ghost, they continue their journey in the upper world with King Kai, they stay dead, whatever. All that only matters if the storytellers make it matter. My biggest issue with the criticism against Infinity War is that most people are letting their external knowledge interfere with their actual absorption of the story. But when you do that, you might do something silly, like miss the theme of the entire film. If you miss those themes, let me spoil this movie that you paid for but didn't watch. Avengers Infinity War is about superhumans learning that they can't save everyone. While the most common complaint about Infinity War is that the deaths are meaningless, a close second is that the movie lazily has Thanos use the same trick where he threatens someone to get a stone from someone else 3 times. At the beginning, Loki gives up the Space Stone to save Thor. Later, Gamora gives up the location of the Soul Stone to save Nebula from agony. And finally, Doctor Strange gives up the Time Stone to ostensibly save Tony Stark.
Spare his life, and I will give you the stone.
All right, we get it. We get it, movie. Chill out. We get it. You don't have to keep doing the same thing all over again. But here's the thing. Many people didn't get it. They didn't see that was the movie repeatedly nailing this theme. It's not lazy writing. It's not the writers like copy and pasting one idea into another part of the movie. This is really smart writing where they have a villain that is exploiting the hero's fatal flaw. And it's a fatal flaw that has been with these heroes for 19 movies now. And it had to come to a head. Every single one of these heroes is willing to take bigger and bigger risks with other people's lives and their own because they think that they will still be able to save everyone in the end. What they won't do is make a sacrifice. And what makes someone a hero? Is it withstanding pain or cleverly outwitting an immoral opponent? Or is a hero someone who is willing to live with the consequences of sacrificing not just themselves, but others? Yeah, you know who has an answer to that question is Thanos. Thanos has an answer to that question. He says that he's the only one willing to do what needs to be done to save life in the universe. And his capacity to make sacrifices is ultimately what enables him to succeed. And I think this is the genius of Marvel. The creative team at the studio is using its biggest criticisms to subvert expectations and to grow its characters. For years now, one of the biggest complaints among fans is that no one ever dies, so you end up watching these films with the belief that nothing is at stake. Well, guess what? The characters now also share that same belief. Things have gone so well for so long that they now believe that same thing, that really, in the end, nothing important is at stake that they can't rescue, that they can't pull from the fire. And that is going to be their downfall.
Thanos has the biggest army in the universe, and he is not going to stop until he gets Vision's stone.
Well, then we have to protect it.
No, we have to destroy it.
So when Thanos has every stone except for the one in Vision's head, and Vision says, destroy me and the stone, and everyone says no, they've been in dire situations before, circumstances where the fate of a planet or even the universe were at stake, and everything worked out. No one died. We can save Vision and we can save the universe by stopping Thanos. And that is the weakness that Thanos exposed and he's exploiting to his own advantage. And that weakness is why the death of Spider-Man, Black Panther, and half of the universe matters. This is where the meaning exists. For Captain America and Iron Man, this is where they were always going to end up, especially Tony Stark. We've watched him struggle for most of the last decade with the weight of the responsibility of protecting everyone on Earth. His consciousness has been eating away at him, and we could see at the beginning of Infinity War that he is struggling to hold it together. Tony wants to marry Pepper. He wants to have a kid, and he wants to sit under his own vine and fig tree. But he can't leave the house without wearing his Iron Man suit on his chest. He carries the burner phone that Steve gave him at all times. He always is ready to call Steve. When Tony says that he can't give up Iron Man, he's really saying that he can't give up the idea that he can save everyone. He believes he could save everyone. He knows that security is slipping from his grasp at all times, but he's still desperately clinging to it. And during the course of Infinity War, someone is going to finally tear that false notion away from Tony once and for all that he could save everyone. But it's not Thanos. It's Doctor Strange.
Dude, you're embarrassing me in front of the wizards.
Using the Time Stone, Doctor Strange looked at 14 million possible futures, and he found only one where they are able to defeat Thanos.
14,605,000.
How many did we win?
One.
When Strange hands over the Time Stone to Thanos, after swearing he would never do that, it's pretty obvious that he was doing that to save Tony, because Iron Man is going to be important in that one potential future. At the end of the movie, when everyone is fading away, including Doctor Strange looks at Tony with an apology in his eyes, with sorrow and with absolute regret.
There was no other way.
He shakes his head with the guilt as he says this to Tony Stark. Not because he gave up the stone, though, or because everyone is dying. Doctor Strange knows. He has looked into the future, and he knows that everyone who is dying now is going to come back. Just like you do. Just like we all do. But Doctor Strange is apologetic because he knows what he's about to do to Tony Stark. He knows the only future where they win is the one where Tony Stark is finally broken and stripped of any sense that he could save anyone. And that is literally going to kill Tony Stark. Literally.
You could have saved us.
I mean, honestly, from the beginning with Iron Man and Tony Stark, he has put the responsibility of saving everyone on himself. And that's, I think, I mean, he shares that with a lot of superheroes, but I do think it comes from a slightly different angle. Captain America, Steve Rogers, does want to rescue people. He also wants to stop the bad guy. He wants to stop the bad guy. Tony Stark wants to stop people from getting hurt. That's where he begins his point. He looks at all the pain he's caused prior to becoming Iron Man. He's lived with that guilt. And now he tries to make a world where people cannot get hurt and cannot die in an unjust way. That, when he did make the sacrifice play in Avengers and he went through the wormhole and he did come back, since then he has been just an exposed nerve to these threats. And it's been his motivation through this entire series.
I see a suit of armor around the world.
Sounds like a cold world, Tony.
I've seen colder. This one, this very vulnerable blue one, it needs Ultron. Peace in our time. Imagine that.
In Age of Ultron, he creates Ultron to put a suit of armor around the world. In Civil War, he agrees to give up some of his autonomy as Iron Man because the Avengers let a bystander die in Avengers 2. That bystander died as the result of Tony's actions with Ultron. In Spider-Man Homecoming, Tony gets frustrated when Peter puts himself and others in danger, but he also warns Spider-Man to stay in his neighborhood because Tony knows, he sees the same desire to prevent people from being hurt in Peter Parker. But Tony knows that trying to save the world is destroying him. And he doesn't want that to happen to Peter Parker as well. And now, in this movie, Doctor Strange has seen that Tony Stark will have to live with the pain of failing to protect people. And he has likely seen that he will have to sacrifice everyone on the Avengers team to undo what Thanos did. And that's not something Tony Stark could have done before those meaningless deaths.